What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. And today, returning to the podcast, is Ilia Delio. That is right. Illia is back on the podcast talking about her new book, The Not Yet God. Say what, Tripp? That's right. Illia, Catholic, theologian, a scholar of Teilhard, specialist in religion and science at Villanova University. She's back, and we are digging into just what happens when we don't assume the philosophical background and picture of the world that was initially used as Christians thought through their understanding of God at a time where we didn't know our planet wasn't the center of a solar system, or our species wasn't a part of a 13.8 billion year evolutionary process, at a time where we had no idea that we could end life on our planet and help steward the evolution of new life, possibly in silicone AI. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, this book is an exciting book. It brings together a whole bunch of her work across different themes and areas, and it was quite exciting to talk to her. And guess what? Ilia Delio is coming to Theology Beer Camp. That's right, the major event for Homebrewed Christianity every year. We're going to have, apparently, we got 40 different God pods. That would be podcasts about God. We have over 30 different scholars, theologians, philosophers, biblical scholars coming to Theology Beer Camp. And there's going to be over 500 nerds in the house. We're going to enjoy tasty craft beverages, have tons of fun. There's going to be all the community you can shake a stick at when normally so many of us only find it listening or engaging online. So head over to theologybeer.camp to join the hype machine. It's going to be a zesty, good old time, and Ilia's going to be there. And you know what else? Guess what? We're going to have a concert. That's right. Ivy King and Flamey Grant, full band concert in a giant October fiesta, big tent. That's what I'm saying. What happens? What's going to happen if Ivy King and Flamey Grant are in a giant October fiesta tent outside a church? That would make it kind of like a revival. But if we were going to have a revival with Flamey and Ivy, then somebody's going to have to rock the mic. What about Diana Butler-Bass? I'm just saying, that's possibly there. So this is Tripp using a podcast intro to set the lure. Diana, Ivy, Flamey, just a suggestion. I'm gonna rent a giant tent, and we're gonna rock it out. And then somebody's going to say something. So I'm just saying, I know y'all probably haven't been invited in a while to participate at a spirit-filled, I mean, it is beer camp, spirit-filled tent revival meeting. But I'm just suggesting maybe it could happen. Okay? This is just the lure, you know? Anyway, Lord, hear my prayer. Hashtag, Lord, hear my prayer. Every time I say hashtag, my son says, "You're such a millennial, Dad." And I was like, geez, I am. Anyway, the last thing I'm going to say, it's coming up in June. In June is the next Homebrewed Christianity class, an online class called Faith and Politics for the Rest of Us. You can sign up at faithandpolitics.net. And my friend, Diana Butler-Bass, you see, I think she might say yes to this tent revival, because we're going to be hanging out all June. And Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals, who's one of the God Pods coming to Beer Camp, we are doing a class looking at what? Faith and politics for the rest of us. Who's the us in the rest of us? The ones that kind of roll their eyes, get grossed out, freaked out, and feeling a little overwhelmed as we move into an election season with Christian nationalism dominating the public square. So we know what we're against. We know what grosses us out. We know we can't go there. But what? Well, what happens if that's your struggle? And then your friends, say Tripp and Diana and Tim, are like, what if we got 6 different of our scholar friends to come on and help us give history and context, and here's the crazy part, multiple live Christian options for how you imagine your theology and politics engaging. I mean, like real options that are like a historic grounding in the Christian tradition, or thought through and wrestled through by professionals that do it all the time. Well, they're going to explain these different options in little 30-minute mini lectures, and then allow us to dig in, wrestle with it, and unpack it. So faithandpolitics.net. You can join as an individual. If you have a group of friends and you want to go through it, or a small group, discussion group, you can do that too. But head over to faithandpolitics.net for a good old time. And remember, if you want to hang out with me and Ilya and Diana and Tim and Flamey and Ivy and 500 plus other people, then go to theologybeer.camp and we'll see you there. The ticket prices go up in June, so, smoochy boochies, friends. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and back on the podcast is Ilia Delio, who has a new book, The Not Yet God, and, it's a doozy. It's a good one. Teilhard, Jung, all the evolutionary cosmo hype machine going on, and really an invitation to a new center for religious belonging, experience, and such. So I'm totally excited to get to have you back on the podcast, Ilya. You were hinting at what was going on in the book last time we talked, and now I've been hanging out with you in my head, reading it, and here you are.
Well, Tripp, it's always a delight to be with you. So I'm happy we can plow and plunge and examine the Not Yet God. So let's do it.
Well, I'm also excited that you're going to come hang out at Beer Camp.
Oh, I can't wait.
I mean, when I think of Theology Beer Camp, one of the things you goes to your head is like, who are your favorite super nerd scholars who are also top-notch hangs when having adult beverages?
Yes.
And after Diana and Brian had us hang out together, and I realized when the theologian realizes that you spiked your own drink during the podcast and insists on sharing it, I'm like, she needs to come to Beer Camp.
Yep, I can slot a Coke and Jack Daniels or whatever anytime. Choice, anyway. Choice.
Well, when thinking about this book, one of the things that made it so compelling, and the way you brought together Jung and Teilhard is, I think, the clarity in which you describe kind of the religious spiritual moment. You describe it both in the negative, in the sense of kind of a Cartesian dualism we're inheriting, kind of reductive materialist response, and you describe it in the positive, that there are these trajectories or habits in the wisdom traditions, and we're on the cusp of something new. So I'd love for you to take some time to kind of set the stage, like what is going on in the world, our understanding of our relationship to the world and the divine that's problematic that we're setting aside, and what are the threads that you want to seize on to move in a new direction?
Yeah, well, great question. I mean, coming from the Catholic Christian tradition, and, one day I was attending a mass, and it was right after the COVID thing, and the priest said, "Don't worry, God is in control." I was like, oh, okay, so we'll just sit back, and make sure the divine does the divine thing. And this I've been really concerned, quite honestly, the way I know Tom Ward and yourself, been having this discussion about deconstructing God and coming to a new understanding of things. But I think the bottom line is we are really stuck and off philosophically. In other words, we're just like kind of stuck on the glue of Aristotle, really, quite honestly. We're like, he's like gum, and if we step on gum, you can't get it off your shoe easily. Well, Aristotle's that gum, and that kind of philosophy of substance and matter and form. And it worked, in the 13th century, it worked in the 16th century, and it continues to function in the 20th century. But, modern science has so radically changed our understanding of matter, and cosmology for that matter. So not to pay attention to modern science, in my view, may be the greatest sin, quote unquote, that we could possibly be doing. And I think we have old conceptions of God, and that's giving rise to a very fractured world. And that's bottom line. If we can get the God button reset, kind of update our files on God, I think we ourselves would find ourselves in a better position to confront the complexities of our age. And I think kind of move beyond some of the oppositional thinking and the polarization and the tribalism that has so fractured us now. So, yeah, basically it's, well, let's very Aristotle. I really like Plato, so I just want to give him a requiem, a very nice one. But let's awaken to modern science and allow that to inform our theological beliefs, right? So, helping us shape those beliefs for the age we actually live in.
Now, part of the way science informs it could even appear surprising for those whose relationship to science, in scare quotes, is kind of just the metaphysical assumptions that are connected to the popular version of science. And one of the things you do in the book is kind of use science to challenge some of the common assumptions in kind of scientism.
Yes.
In the book, there's a number of dualisms and such you dwell on. Can you kind of help us see how the science is really inviting us into a different picture of the world? And in this text, we're looking at the relationship of matter and spirit,
Right.
and such than maybe one could assume if you just think scientifically.
Yes. So, if we just take the two sort of main pillars of 20th century science, which would be evolution and quantum physics, as scientism, Darwin sort of was a believer, from that in the beginning, and then, going through and then realizing that there are mechanisms in nature that can explain the variety of species and how things adapt, how species adapt. Less and less was seen a need for a creator, so God became sort of obsolete there. And that's the kind of thing with scientism. It's like, science is going to explain our ultimate meaning, give us ultimate values. And of course it can't, because it's provisional knowledge. I mean, any good scientist, I think a decent scientist, would recognize that, yes, it's empirical. Yes, it's subjective insofar as that every objective piece of data is formed by a subject of interpretation. So I don't want to overplay objectivity in science, because I think that has been actually a fallacy, a misplaced concreteness in its own way. And so I think science, on the negative side, it can't answer our questions of finality and totality and absoluteness, or what we're oriented to in the final long run. On the other hand, it has opened windows we never thought existed at all. So one would be not only change in nature, but the fact that we humans are emerging out of a long process of biological life as it, moves through these mechanisms of selection, genetic selection now, and adaptation, and the way personhood begins to form, which is really kind of remarkable. I think it certainly impels theologians and philosophers to reconceive the human person now within the context of complexified relationships in a way we've never done. I mean, again, I think we still have sort of a classical Boethian notion. We are bodies with minds and souls, done. Like incommunicable substances of rational nature. What does that mean in now a type of life that's unfolding for about 3.7 billion years here on Earth, that we emerge from these small molecules to bacteria, from prokaryotic to eukaryotic. And then how does consciousness emerge? And that's where I think quantum physics, and not everyone settled on this question, for sure. But, Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit scientist that I have been following and using, really thought there was a mental dimension to materiality. There's a mindful quality. And, the notion of panpsychism, as we know, is being renewed today by people like Philip Goff and philosopher Galen Strawson and others. And I find it really fascinating because it makes a lot more sense. And so one thing about science, like theology, it should be coherent, with our experience of things, and not incoherent, and not just some random, like esoteric explanation. And so I do think panpsychism, I think evolution, and the fact that we are still emerging, that we are not just in evolution, we are evolution now on the new level of thought or self-reflective consciousness. So we're unfinished. And I think one of the things that evolution really holds out to us is, guess what? You're not done and over and fallen and fragile. You're unfinished. You're incomplete. So, slow down and, just kind of, engage in the creative processes of life, like what you can be or might be in the future. And I think that's so much more hopeful, quite honestly. So I do think science is really a breath of fresh air. And this is why I don't understand why we hang on to old philosophies, quite honestly, because I think science is really opening up new avenues and new ways to think about things, unprecedented in human history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of the hesitation for people in religious traditions to really evolve their metaphysics and theology and such is that for a certain number of people, it's the conclusions that justify the enactment, that certain conclusions carry with it an authority which justifies the experience of participating in the tradition. And so to rethink something that you notice has been rethought quite a few times ever since humans started working with symbols, and has been rethought through a multiplicity of times in different communities historically and religious traditions. But like the moment you do intentional, deliberate reframing, that you're at a point where there needs to be a paradigm shift, there you have now located the content of one's theology into history in a radical way. If part of its authority was it exists outside of time and history, and you're in the ark of salvation or whatnot,
Right.
and so that like evolution side of looking at the story of spirit in humanity in its diversity, I think is a real important element to describe and bring to the fore, so that people in religious traditions and communities can put some distance between the descriptive account they give theologically of their encounter with the divine within the tradition and the finality of their particular conditioned human account. Once the gap's there, but the spirit's present nonetheless, I feel like we have more permission to do better with our divining poetics of sorts.
Yeah, that's interesting, Chip. I like that. And I think the thing is, you used language of symbol and story. The thing is, we have, I do feel at a very fundamental level, I think there's this hesitancy to shift the narrative, to change the, to update the symbol, because we have been so ingrained in thinking a certain way. In other words, the human brain has been wired and conditioned to think about God, irrespective of everything else. That for us to change those circuits almost seems like a tsunami, like an anthropological tsunami. And then if we die in the next moment, God is going to judge us like you messed up everything. And, the eternal fire awaits us. And, we have a lot of fear. That's maybe one of the things. And I think, engaging theology in this way, in a new creative way, trying to shift the paradigm so that religion becomes a co-partnering source of knowing, meaning and values and God and God's self. It comes at a time we're a very fragile species right now. But the fact is, these things work together. We're very fragile because we have no meta narrative. We have no overarching story. We're now a very large, global complexified planet of people, and we don't know what to do with the diversity of, people, the diversity of religions, the diversity of values. We don't know how to make sense of these things together. And I think this is the part of the problem from my view, and you asked in the beginning why I wrote this book, is, in the past, we know religion played a significant role in the shaping of community. And it gave people a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging together, even in the ancient tribes of spiritualities. And today we've lost that. Now, I think social media has tribalized us further because, we go on to the apps that we find are kin to, like I'm into centering prayer or yoga or stargazing or UFOs. And so we have just this like myriad number of spiritualities and individual pathways. And this is actually it's kind of devolving us, we're thinning out. And so what I'm trying to do is get to a fundamental understanding of how can science give us a fundamental understanding of the ground of what we are, what is the ground itself of our beingness, that we name as God, and how can we come to a new sense of not only wholeness in our own lives, but belonging to a whole. So I'm really interested in not just a philosophical, theological reconstruction, but how do we build a new narrative? And I know we share this understanding. Like, what's the new? What's the story that binds us together? And is it possible to really find such a story in this now very complexified planet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's been in the last 50 years a ton of work on the emergence of religion and early humans.
Yes.
You think of like Robin Dunbar's big research project that he worked on, or like Robert Bella's big book, and all those kinds of things. And I find that kind of emergence of religion story really helpful for reflecting on the invitation to something new, because most of us that grow up in a religious tradition have like our preferential option for axial age expression of the correct biblical theological version that we grew up in, right? And part of what they describe is that, like, before we even had language, we had spiritual technologies of music and rhythm. And how did we learn to cooperate and have shared values with people once we got over 140 people? It was religious traditions. What were the first things we built together as a species? It wasn't a home or a field to grow thing. It was sacred ritual space. And the emergence of language, where culture and everything later comes from, is so grounded in the kind of cooperative resonance that is religion. To then look at where we are now and go, the story of religion changed. You have the axial period and this kind of thing. But to go now, do we want the narrative that binds us, shapes us, and helps us cooperate to be an algorithmically driven one based on our fear and tribe? And it is ever increasing efficiency and acceleration for the exploitation of market outcomes.
It's exactly
and
right.
If you like the moment you start to think of it in that big picture, you got to go, well, we might be post axial religion, but we aren't non-religious because we have a true religion, and we're all interpreting ourselves through its guilt and anxiety system, performing our identity on the means it can decide, with the ones that get marketed to. And then what are the fruits of this tradition? Well, look at what we're doing to our planet and our neighbors. So, like, to me, like that framing, and I remember the first time you were presenting on this book, I was like, yes, if we don't have that question when we talk about God, it can't be good at news enough for my grandkids to breathe. And it should not have the word Jesus associated, because he taught me to pray for my enemies.
Exactly. No, that's spot on, really. I mean, I think this is something Carl Jung noted, that, our symbol system is dead. I think we have to just name it in the West. It's dead. It doesn't really work anymore. It doesn't function. And I think you're absolutely right in saying that, what has been in the past, and I agree, reading on the evolution of religion is really, really fascinating and very helpful to understand how religion functioned. I think of the work of Mircea Eliade, the great religion scholar from the University of Chicago, the sacred and the symbol, and and the way religion functioned as the primary myth maker for the community from which all other values then would spring. Once we, in a sense, had a sense of being bound together in this spiritual way with ritual and story, and where the community itself was the primary locus of identity, and individuality emerged from the community. Now it's just the opposite. It's just like, here I am, my little wandering individual self. I think I'll go find a community to fit me. It's like totally backwards and why it's not really working too well. So, number one, how do it, is it possible to reclaim religion as that deep sacred myth in a way that, can function like it did in the past as a community, like as a community builder where, and I don't think it's negated or precluded by the fact that we're much larger and more complexity than ever before, really. But I do think we have to at least set that as a goal. And I think, my hermeneutic of wholeness is kind of moving in that direction. And then second, I think absolutely right. The way algorithms have, kind of dictated, what our religious landscape is or the religious matrix of things. And unfortunately, our digital footprint now has just overpowered everything. I mean, we're so digitized, we're so algorithmically formed. I think we've lost consciousness of the locus of of identity or the seat of our own consciousness that we've kind of sold ourselves out, to technology in a way that's unhelpful. I'm not against technology by any means. I actually love it, but we have not wisely entered into the very stuff we're creating that's allowing us to transcend ourselves. So religion has become more and more fractured. It is a source of violence, in some places. And for some, it's been personally violent, which is why they, ditched religion to go into whatever helps them feel healed and whole. So I kind of get that. But there is a value to religion. So I think I think the kind of total secularization or, like the materialistic or the scientism stuff, I don't want to totally, I mean, there are people who live in this world who are completely happy, they're happy just being good people. But, I think what I, want to do in my own way is to say, you know what, guess what? You're actually living a type of religious life, believe it or not, even though you may not want to name it as such. So reconceiving God in a way that allows this breath of life, that's life itself, to not be so closed in. We have so boxed in God. Christians, well, I don't know. I guess the monotheistic religions, we've defined God. We lock God into theological, very narrow categories, and then we defend these categories to the nth degree against one another. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And it's so, please, this is where everyone should go to theology beer camp, by the way, and chill out and shove a beer. And we're so lost sight of things. This is my, and go back to the book. The whole thing is like we have within us all that we need, to really find that wholeness, that salvific grace. It's not so much it's outside us. It's already, in a sense, latent within us. It's potent. It's there, but we have to actualize. You have to turn the lights on, so to speak. It's a dark room.
Well, you one of the things you have in the book are the role Carl Jung and Teilhard play are these individuals who were observing how our bifurcation of like matter and spirit, mind and body, like what they were observing as that became more and more culture dominant problems in their own time. One as a psychologist and one as an anthropologist and dealing with in a scientific framework. And I often find there are certain, like the critical thinkers at the beginning that are challenging the oncoming dominant age of sorts are revelatory. You can see that if you just look through church history at how the heretics 100 years ago have a point of what ended up happening, kind of thing. If you had asked me before I read the book, I wouldn't have known the connection lines that you were able to draw using Jung and Teilhard. So can you kind of share with us a bit about, like, introduce us to each figure and how the kinds of questions they were fascinated with generated the kind of symbolic reservoir for you to do the exploration in the book?
Well, I'm still a novice with regard to Carl Jung, so there's a lot of Jungian specialists out there. But first of all, Jung himself was brought up in a Christian family. His father was a pastor, and he kind of, I don't say renounced religion, but he had a lot of questions about it. And he didn't accept it lock, stock, and barrel. And Jung went off to medical school, and he's really a forerunner. He's a student of Sigmund Freud. And later on, he disagreed with Freud on some of Freudian's ideas, especially with regard to religion. And I think what Jung was able to do in a very novel way. So he was an iconoclastic thinker. He could, stand outside, the mainstream of religion and begin to question it. And yet, he was deeply religious because he read that Bible really, really carefully. That's what's so interesting about Jung. I mean, it's really clear that he thought long and hard about, the New Testament in particular and what Jesus was about. But, he combined that inner faith he had with his explorations of the human mind. And he began to map out these levels of consciousness, which really have been, I don't think we have given sufficient attention to the way psychology and neuroscience have really impacted our understanding of not just the human self, but what we are, even in our religious dimension. So Jung's notion of the psyche, the collective unconscious, the way that the ego, can be, in a sense, is self-isolated or kind of separated from these deeper levels of consciousness, giving rise to this fact that many people are living on this kind of lower level, of a self-isolated ego. And it's kind of maintained by external law or authority or obedience, which has been governed a lot of church life, just here's what the pastor says or what the father says or what Rome says. And, you do it, you obey and you'll be saved idea. And Jung's like, that's not it at all, and he's saying that religion, first of all, is a natural dimension of human existence. And Teilhard said the same thing. And that's the first thing, that they agree on. Religion is not some kind of external, heavenly, divine grace that's, bestowed on those who just wake up to God. It's actually the depth dimension of what biological life is about. So religion is a natural phenomenon. Second is he's saying that, to put it in Jung's kind of quippy way, the many gods become one God, the one God becomes human, and the human is to become God. And, his notion of individuation, like we have to do the hard work of reconciling the shadow self, the dark stuff, we kind of, our hurts, our biases, our deep angers, the stuff that we really store up within us. I think Jesus was talking about storehouse, barns filled to overflowing. And the Jungian idea, that's the inner self, that kind of, unconscious self at times. It's there. It's a shadow. It doesn't light up, quickly, but it's actually preventing us from living into our full freedom as persons. And so he says, unless we reconcile the ego with those deeper levels of the psyche, he said, we will be forced to live out the unreconciled self without us. So this is one way I've begun to interpret violence, that the violence outside in this world already begins in the unreconciled self, in that darkness of the human heart. And so the other thing that Carl Jung is saying is that, guess what? No God but you, and you're like, no, that's ridiculous, really. Because, if we say we're divine by nature, like we have a divine nature, that's just, for a Catholic, that's like, really, and I think we don't know what that means, because because divinity is still, in that sense of substance. God is ontologically distinct from us. How could God possibly be, at part of who I am? And yet we do have this whole thing called the incarnation, that Yep. So that's, so Jung puts all that together and says, look, you're meant for godly things, and I think coming into that full sense of self, of personhood, is to become that's Athanasius. God became human so that the human could become God. End of story. Teilhard actually, came to very similar insights, but from a whole different perspective. Studying matter, he was very much in dialogue with the physicists of his day, very intrigued by this withinness and withoutness of matter, consciousness and materiality. He spoke about an energetic presence of love, throughout all of biological life. And basically comes to a very similar insight, like God is not, the creator, but the one that wholeness in creative union. God is not utterly simple. God is actually the power of complexity itself, so he's coming to novel insights. And just, as a PS here, Carl Jung had a copy of Teilhard's The Phenomenon of Man, or now retranslated as The Human Phenomenon, on his side table the week he died. So Jung was actually in contact with Teilhard de Chardin. I mean, how amazing is that? It would be like you and I being in contact, after we write some really, overturning books. And I would say, I had Tripp Fuller's book at my side table when I,
Well, hopefully you're not leaving us anytime soon.
No, I don't do that. But anyway, they were in contact. There was a convergence of thought. And actually what I see is there was a lot of thinking along these lines in the mid-20th century. Many people, it's not that they wanted to ditch religion, it's that they were paying attention to modern science. They were now paying attention to new insights from psychology. There was a whole kind of an exploration of materiality and spirituality being in this kind of intertwined way, if not kind of a monistic way in some ways, and they were experimenting. Paul Tillich, slightly different. I mean, he did have more of an ontology than the others, but, he too, you could see in these explorations, something was brewing, let's put it that way, in the mid-20th century, like a new field of religion and spirituality was brewing. Jung tapped into it, spoke about the process of individuation, spoke about Christ as symbol and not savior. Jesus did not come to save us because we have that power within ourselves, in a sense, to be. By salvation, I take, coming out of that fracturedness or that dividedness and being made whole, in a new kind of reality of personhood. And Teilhard, had similar. He never spoke about Jesus saving us at all. In fact, he never spoke about Jesus, period. Maybe once or twice he might have mentioned him, but always about Christ. So, something was taking place there. And I do think they're onto something. We need to be on it too. That's basically my final one.
Well, one of the things that those threads between them is the way they challenge the Aristotelian and kind of early modern just framing the moment you bring up God and the world, right? So a lot of people will get defensive at hearing different attempts at describing a different relationship. And this is also true about Tillich, right? And his kind of criticism of theism and atheism as a framing. Like, part of it is, if we use the word God and are aware of what's going on in the world, the idea that we frame it as a giant gap between the two is like, it's like getting the wrong pieces out to play chess. You can't play the game. And there's a problem with supernaturalism in that it requires something super for the divide between the divine and the created to meet. And that both Jung, Tillich, Teilhard, process tradition stuff raised that question, but also like people like David Bentley Hart that are much more orthodox in the big N little o do, and that's because it's not that metaphysical distinction is not the gospel, and it's not needed, right? And I think that's one of the reasons these figures that start to intuit something different are energizing, and how these connections start to get played out is because do we need to ordain a particular metaphysic that has problems when it gets when it goes to engaging our scientific accounts of the world in
I
order
agree.
to have anything meaningful connected to the word God.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. In fact, yeah, and I think that was one of the things about Jung. He was saying basically we've developed a religion that has no support within the New Testament. Now, what's really interesting is recently I was looking over the work of Larry Hurtado, a New Testament scholar, who spoke about Jesus as one who had a mutation of consciousness. Maybe I put in consciousness. He spoke about mutation, but that's what he was saying basically. That something took place within Jesus's life and in the life of the disciples, like a little, light went on there, so to speak, a mutation of some sort. And I thought that's something that Jung, would agree to. I think that there's something about, and Teilhard himself, like Jesus was not about a substance form, divine, utter, absolute simplicity, immutability, the God who's omnipotent, omniscient, ubiquitous. Um, he would have been like, huh? Like, who's that? So I think Jesus would have had a really, really hard time with, the way Christianity has developed. He wouldn't have recognized it. He would have been like, get out of here. I'm getting my whip out now. Cleaning out this temple. So that's number one. Jesus, was really about a shift in consciousness, which really is what I think religion is ultimately about. If you look again at the emergence of religions, yes, they do arise and, shape cultures, but there's something that takes place. There's an awareness that begins to shift. And I think axial religion is really a shift in consciousness or awareness in, the major parts of the world. And Jesus is paradigmatic of that.
Mm-hmm. For those that may not be familiar with that because they haven't gone and bought the book or,
please buy it.
but axial religion, that moment, kind of describe it and then how that for you, right? These figures are opening up an invitation for kind of a different paradigm emerging.
Right. Exactly. And axis, is like a hub around which everything turns. That's really what we mean here. So, like a way of thinking around which everything else turns. So that's what we mean by axial religion. So the idea of a transcending God, a God, not just in the trees and the wind and the sky and the sea and, who's in me, but now a God who is beyond me. And so, but Jesus is beyond this God, which was, in a sense, the Jewish God, the Hebrew God, I should say more accurately, wasn't so much beyond because that God was deeply in relationship with Israel. If you read the Old Testament, always, like getting a little bit upset and like, oh my gosh, there they go again. I have to go after them. Should I do this? I really love you. I don't want to love you. So I find the Jewish God very, very emotional and so very much in relationship and very much not an unmoved mover, but a deeply moved mover. Like, I'm coming to get you because I really, really love you. And then comes Jesus, like, yeah, that God is right here, like right here, like breaking in, and here he is. Like, I'm just going to show you. So, I love scripture because it's so much of life. And that's the beauty of it. And the way how did we ever move from a life-giving life, which is God. God is that power of life. That's really what we're talking about. I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. To this kind of figure that's somewhere between a political monarch, or an oligarch or the Wizard of Oz. It's very hard to really make sense of how we went from, say the New Testament to the Wizard of Oz, or to have this kind of, the Matrix God, the supercomputer God, Hal too.
Yeah. Well, we did manage to take the person that was crucified on a cross and turn God into one that builds them for his enemies.
Yeah,
So
for sure. So we've done a good job of really deconstructing everything that Jesus was about, but not in a unhealthy way. So, so here's the thing, like, the good news. I mean, I love that. I love, Jesus' sayings like, the reign of God is within you, right? You don't have to go looking for it. It's right here. Like, wake up, get your head in the game. Destroy this temple. I will rebuild it in 3 days. And they're all like, this guy is a lunatic, who does he think he is? That's why I really do think being Christian, you have to be slightly quirky, to be so totally logical and, discursive and completely rational. Like Christianity is a rational religion. Really? Have you read the New Testament? It's not rational at all. So it's not the logic of the intellect. It's the logic of love. And love has its own built-in logic, And that's the thing. Love does really crazy things sometimes. That's the kind of God that's the kind of God who's who's this power of my life. We can do crazy things to make life more celebrative, good for all, more communal, more life, and so we're overly rational, and now we're kind of, I don't know what we are. We're just overly computerized. And we kind of miss the signs. Honestly, it's within us. And I do think, not yet God built on that fundamental scriptural idea that the reign of God is within you. So, and it doesn't mean you have to go off to a retreat and do yoga for, 2 years or center prayer. Those are good practices. We do need to train the mind for sure. But we're always looking outside ourselves. Like we don't even trust ourselves. It's like we're empty within and we have to be filled from without. And I think Jesus is not like you have it within and then you fill with the without from within, so. And Teilhard had the same notion, the within, without. And Jung had the same notions of within, without. So that's, there's the key to the whole thing. It's like we're living in the wrong direction, basically.
Yeah. Well, the title's the Not Yet God, and then in the text itself, Teilhard helps you ask reorient the all, right? The pan part of it. Can you, as someone who's spent a long time with Teilhard and ask all sorts of different questions, what about his own thought kind of energized this reorientation of the way we use spatial metaphors for the divine and end up with a God so alienated from nature, it's not worth a damn?
Yeah. Well, again, I think the good news about Teilhard is that he spent a lot of time in China, like in the desert, with basically probably little electricity and definitely no cell phone service or, internet. So he had a lot of time to really think deeply about the things of faith and the things of science. And second, he was very attentive to how biological evolution was taking place, this kind of slow working through different processes. And I think, today, I think the work of my colleague, John Hood, has been very helpful in kind of laying out how modern science, especially now with the theory of relativity, the way space and time have been reframed as part of the mattering of the world so that space and time are not absolutes. So we can't talk about God outside time and as if we're in time. There's no container of time, and rather that there's this dynamic unfolding of space-time matter, put it in that kind of short-term idea, so that God is part of what is itself emerging. That's what Teilhard recognized. And that's really hard to get our heads around because we're pretty sure there's a God up there who's laid all the ground plans, a prime mover, and we're just, everything else is just moving within the prime mover. But it's like, no, there's no prime mover secondary causes idea. It's just like it's all moving together, including God. That's the whole idea. And so space and time are coming into being. God is coming into being as we're coming into being. And that seems like, well, what governs us? Like, what, like who's going to take care of everything? if things go wrong? Who's going to judge me? I mean, there's got to be another God out there for sure. And I'm just saying is that God is the short, it's like a symbol. God is a symbol. So God's not like a big being. God's not like some grandfather guy, although that is how we picture God. A symbol of how I might say the wholeness of life itself. And the ancients thought about life as goodness, as beingness, being itself. But God is both within and God is ahead, right? Because God is more than any one person or any finite thing could ever, comprehend, for one thing. So God is we are a limited version of the wholeness of God. So we are, we're a finite expression of the infinite God, so to speak, which means that God is within, God is, taking shape in and through our lives, in and through this emerging way of life. And even as God becomes fully realized, I think, if we were to imagine that at the end of time, whatever that could possibly mean, that even that will be an openness to moreness. And that's I think Whitehead had something like this itself, the ongoingness of creativity. And, there's a dynamism written into nature. So God will always be the more. God is always the future. God is always the plenum, the infinite plenum of life itself. Life unto life unto life, which could be, 10 zillion billion years, if ever, even if this universe passes away, maybe it will, maybe it'll crunch, maybe it'll go into a black hole, in 10 zillion years, we will definitely not be here. But, God will always be the more. And yet the moreness of that God is the wholeness of my life. That's the incredible mystery of the whole thing. That moreness of the God is the very God that's seeking to become God in me, to be actualized in love. So it's like saying, here's the possibility, but for that possibility to be realized, it has to be actualized. We have to respond. We have to play our part in making something happen. You can have a lock and a key, but the door won't open unless the key goes into the lock. Same idea.
Yeah, what you're getting at is the ever increasing lack of traction when our God language is continuously defined by an account of the world we don't live in.
Yes.
And some people feel like the need for the religious tradition, like to can pass on the wisdom that has been stewarded in the tradition, is to treat as infallible whatever the metaphysics of the day was when language got arranged the way it did. And part of recognizing the living and life-giving God's presence in the whole story of existence is like that's the starting point in this new paradigm for understanding religious traditions again, is that God was always already getting itself done in those traditions. And now that you don't have one of them that is the singular final expression, but the multiplicity of diverse fruits of this divine entanglement, how do you orient yourself again? And I just find it real odd that Christians are the ones that have such a hard time doing it when we're the story of Jesus seems like rather helpful for doing so, right? Like it's one of those things where you go, everyone that wrote in the New Testament, they were all Jewish, and so was Jesus. And we've already figured out how, like, within a very few years, to even tell the historical Jesus who was like, don't change the vowel signs on the Hebrew Bible at all, or you're wrong. Then, like, his own disciples were like, well, the Holy Ghost has touched the Gentiles without getting snipped, so I guess we should evolve. So, like, we've even canonized, like, being faithful to the Spirit, doing new things as what real fidelity is, even though Homeboy originally in the flesh on the Sermon on the Mount's like, don't even change the vowel signs. I guess in the canon. And then he's like, you'll do greater things than me in the Gospel of John. And the beginning of
Right.
Acts, he's like, hold on, let me give you the agenda speech again, but then the Holy Spirit's going to come. Or like all the New Testament's packed full of, you just know the Spirit's always going to transcend, but it will continue to include, and you have to be discerning as to how you preserve. What are you conservative about, and what are you saying yes to on the horizon? Because
Yeah.
God is the world's future, in a sense. That's, John Hott's line, thinking of
Yeah.
the way he plays out, like the eschatological orientation of the Christian people is that God is who will be all in all. So in what way in this moment are you saying yes to the possibilities that have to remain in front of us? They have to be the
And
not yet.
absolutely. You said a lot there, Tripp. I mean, first of all, yeah, to remember that Jesus was Jewish. I mean, he was born Jewish and he died Jewish. He didn't convert to Catholicism at any point in time, nor did he convert to Christianity. He didn't know the Pope or anything like this. His mother was not Catholic, neither did she convert. And all the disciples, well, they were Jewish and Gentiles. So it's a mixed group. Christianity from the very beginning was a polyglot group. I mean, it was always pluralistic. So that's kind of funny that we're always trying to smush it into some kind of homogeneous thing. But the other thing is like, I love this idea about the Spirit because I think sometimes we don't think of the Spirit as God. like, like the Spirit is something like a wind, a breath, something that flows from the Father and the Son. And I think we think of the Father and the Son as like the two dudes who are God, and then they have this breath of the Spirit. But actually, in the Cappadocian theology, the Father is the Spirit, the Son, the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Spirit is God. So what I find one thing we really lack is a good Trinitarian theology. I mean, we're not really sure what to do with the Trinity. And how do we know that? Because like we have Trinity Sunday in the Catholic Church, and then it's always kind of awkward preaching on the Trinity because it's always coming up as the 3-leaf clover,
Oh, yeah.
and this. So
Protestants let their youth ministers preach that Sunday just so that the senior minister is like, I don't know what to do. Let's let the youth minister do it.
exactly, right? And this is the whole thing. Like you want to talk about a Christian God? Well, guess what? It's really not a strict monotheism. Although we have done a lot of theologizing, it's really kind of a tri-monotheism, right? And so we're like, well, what's that? And that is the whole thing. You can't talk about like Thomas Aquinas wanted like the one God and then, the three God. And it's like, really? Is God one or three? What is that? And then we have one and three, three and one, two natures, one person, three persons, one nature. So, it gets all kind of iffy wiffy, but I think the whole thing about Christianity is not about God. It's about person. That's the whole beauty of it. It's like Jesus shows up in a radically new way, a radical new consciousness of God, where the Jewish God is now sort of like, well, guess what? In a person, and it's a personal experience. So that personalization of God is kind of the basis of the fact that it's no longer just one God, but a personal God is now kind of plural. A person has a source, a person has an expression as person, and a person has kind of an energetic presence. We're kind of, in terms of quantum, reality, we're particles and waves. There's a particle aspect and there's a wave aspect. And the field itself is God, maybe what we call the Father. So I think we have a very loosey-goosey, if not just kind of off the track understanding of Trinity. And why do I say this? Because he brought up the Spirit. And I think, if we understand that it's God, like the Trinity may not be just 3 men at a tea party or this, closed community that wakes up and decides to have a creation like, hey, what's happening today? Oh, I think we'll make a creation. Great idea, Oh, no, they messed it up. Well, you'll have to go and fix it. Okay, Dad, because so I don't think it's that at all. I think it's in more of the Hegelian idea of a dialectic between infinite source, and finite expression. That there's this infinite fecund fullness of life, and there's always a particular expression of that life, and that kind of that dialectic or tension between the infinite and the finite is always a working out of the Spirit. And therefore, God, the Spirit, is always, I think the Trinity is the very symbol of God's openness to becoming something new.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what we're saying. I think I write about that,
Yeah.
in Trinitization. And that's the whole point. It's like, there's no God substance up there and we're here. This is a God who is deeply personal at the heart of personhood, who is seeking to become more God and godly in and through the energies of love, which is, what the Spirit is about, that breath of life. And so if we got the Trinity kind of straightened out, as to what the Trinity means in terms of us, in terms of the Christ, I think we would do better than to realize that this God there's no God there, actually. The only God there is the God empowering life and the God who is that potential of life, that fullness of life up ahead. And therefore, I think God is like, I really want to be God. It's like, I really do. I mean, I'm dying to be more God in you, because I'm not really, to put this very bluntly, like God's saying, I'm not really complete. I'm not really filled with all that I could possibly be, because you can help, complete what I am. And we're like, no, you're God. We can't do that. And God's like, oh yeah, you can.
Yeah.
And you must, actually, if we are really to have the fullness of life together.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
And I think that mystery is the Christ, very simply.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned kind of the different way the Trinity gets expounded in the East is different than the West, and kind of went to the way Aristotle, ends up shaping Aquinas's laying out of God, where there's like, before you get to anything particularly Christian, you get like a monotheism and this kind of thing. But when I took the history of the Trinity seminar, like where you're, the philosophical theology of the Trinity up to Augustine, like he's way cooler than Aquinas, because like part of the eternal generation of the Son, like that God is triune from eternity, is precise. Like a father and a son have no identity outside of relation, and what is their relation is love, which is a spirit. And to be made in the image of God, and to be made from the goodness of the triune God, is to, like Christ, the eternal Son, be the object of divine love, and the reciprocal sharer of divine love. Like the very dignity of creation is that while you may not know it yet, you are known and loved completely by the God who is love. And as you receive that love and give it back to the source or the Father, or whatever way you want to use the language, then you come to image more completely. And how do we know this? Because we saw what it looks like when it took up flesh in Jesus. This is what love unbroken looks like in sandals, and this is what you're baptized into. This is what you're nourished at the table by, and this is what the promise of salvation for all is, namely, when sin, law, and death become subject to the Son, God, Son to the Father, God is all in all. That was what I was always going. And I was sitting there going like, I don't know, this is way cooler than the Trinity stuff I had. Augustine has his other issues, but like that persons require each other. You're known in the other, and true knowing involves the risk and vulnerability of love and the genuine openness to the other. Like those kinds of things are like the very elements you're trying to reteach Christians in the book, to be like, have you considered these things that are the very basics of Christianity to really be the basics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really good. Actually, I was thinking, there's some people who have critiqued Augustine's, image of God in terms of psychological image of memory, intellect, and will. But I do think that we could take that Augustinian image of God, memory, intellect, and will, and then bring it into the Jungian idea that the name God, or the source of infinite life at the heart of our life. So that basically what we're saying is, to be reconciled within ourselves is actually the beginning of real love. That, love itself it's a gift insofar as we awaken to wholeness, we awaken to the goodness of life. And I think that kind of Jungian Augustinian nexus could be very helpful in realizing that this love of God is not so much outside myself as it first begins within myself, that in my sense of, Jesus's command, love of God, love of neighbor, love of self, and I think we have failed in that regard because we have placed entirely too much emphasis that we're fallen and weak and that there can be nothing within me that's lovable. And I think Jung is saying, no, that's exactly where the Trinity begins, that this source of life. And therefore, in my own way of putting this together, awakening to a raising of consciousness to this fountain fullness of life at the heart of my life, which is a recapitulation of all life in terms of evolution and emergence. As I awaken to that and I become reconciled with that within myself, I am then in that Trinitarian dynamic of spirit of freedom and then love and then, moving outward. And that's the whole thing, that love of God within myself does set us free to go beyond ourselves. And I guess that's the whole point, is like when we're free to give ourselves away in love, then God does, in a sense, become more and more a fruitful reality. Like we begin to see the world with new eyes, that what we are intended for is not just surviving in a world of injustice and darkness and violence. What we are actually, we have the capacity for is a world of justice and peace and shared life. It's already, and that's what, that the importance about doing this kind of maybe novel theological work for our own time is that the gospel still has immense value, for one thing. And the second is we have not yet realized our capacity for more life. And I think right now with our ecological crises, we owe it to younger generations to do everything we can to bring back a credible God, a God who is life itself, that we are here for life. We are intended to be part of that life, divine life project. And that for us means to build up love in the world, both personally, communally, and globally.
Mm-hmm. When I was you briefly talk about Pannenberg in the book, but early on, before mid-career, he get deeply engaged in ecumenical dialogue with very conservative German Catholics, and his theology got a little less radical. But early on in his book, Theology and the Kingdom of God, he has this section that's very similar to what you're describing, where in one of these lines that just kind of burned in my head, he says, "There's a true but limited sense in which God does not yet exist." And he does this after describing what would it mean for us to think that Jesus's picture of the already and not yet, the coming, the arrival but not yet fulfillment of the kingdom of God, that's the theological nexus from which you think. And it means, in some sense, that until history and the web of life, that its relations correspond to how God is in God's self-love, then God does not yet exist, because God's always on the horizon, but it's not to be on the horizon in the abstract or the distanced or or this kind of thing. It's on the horizon to become material, to become enacted, and that so often we frame ourselves towards the past, that then the breakthrough, or as I think we'd prefer, the rupturous emergence that is the Christ, then gets isolated, and then it gets abstracted from the very ongoing flow of the Spirit that we're tangled up in. And so that eschatological orientation, he says, for theology is like there's a real but limited sense in which God does not yet exist, because the web of life and relations don't actually materialize the desire and love of God, which is like basically the Lord's Prayer, right?
Yeah.
on earth as it is in heaven. God's got heaven completely under control.
Exactly. Exactly. Another way to say this is like, we can have everyone running to church, but if we do not have, you might say, a living relationship with a living God, it's a basically atheistic world. In other words, you may have religion in name or in talk, but for God to be fully actualized is what really makes this world a spiritually charged world where religion now functions as that core, that depth dimension of love that now begins to bind us together in a new way. So I think, I love that about Pannenberg, by the way. I'm going to have to check that out a little bit more. I think I came across it at some point. But your insight just reminded me two other things. Like one is that the Trinity is not just a symbol. We have translated into a symbol that has become irrelevant. Karl Rahner once said, if we dispense with the Trinity tomorrow, it would make no iota of a difference to the way Christians practice, their monotheistic faith. Michael Heim said if Rome decided that they added a fourth person to the Trinity, we'd have to call a meeting on how to remake the sign of the cross. So it's a basically irrelevant doctrine. And the thing is, it's actually symbolizing, I think, the openness of God to becoming God in us. That's the whole idea of it. The Trinity is what, in a sense, is the basis of incarnation. It's the whole point that God is self-communicative, that God is love and seeks to share that love, not only within God's self, but the perfection of that love is outside God's self. And that's the whole thing when we talk about the not yet God. It's like God is not fully complete because the perfection of love is not within God, but the perfection of love. And I think that's what the incarnation's about, that, God's desire to share love to the full has to go beyond oneself. God's not narcissistic, basically. God's not just wrapped up in God's self. And we're not just like add-ons. Like, what a lovely idea. I think I'll just share my love with you, but actually you make no difference to me whatsoever. And I'm like, how can that possibly be love? Which I think Weishaupt said something similar. Like, this has got to be a real relationship. And I think God is about real relationships. I don't think God is about internal relationships and external relationships. I think that's kind of contrived, quite honestly. So I do think we need to get the Trinity back on track. And then we have to realize now in an unfinished universe where evolution is ongoing, where we're part of that ongoing evolution, that we are now part of what the Trinity is becoming. So Teilhard used the term Trinitization. It's a process of this pluralistic God, this God who's manifest as source, as expression, as word of life, who's dynamically engaged here in our lives. So we're caught up in this God. We're not just add-ons. We're not tech-ons. And getting our heads around that's going to take some time. We need new symbols, basically. We need new stories. We need new art, and we need new music.
One of the places in the book where I just started giggling, which is sometimes a problem and sometimes it's revelatory to me. But you do this bit, like earlier you talked about the hard problem of consciousness as a way of getting at we all have the experience of being a thinking subject, and I luckily projected at least on my friends that you too have your own interiority. But where in the world do you get consciousness from? Is it a figment, or do you have like a miracle where it shows up when, I guess, in the third trimester when we get endowed with an immortal soul, or or this kind of thing, or is it always already entailed in mattering, our preferential option? But like that, the hard problem, right, is precisely hard because what you mean by matter and what you mean by mind are necessarily opposed, right? Like that's why it's a hard problem, because our definitions just don't work, and it creates a predicament whose solution is ancient and can be recapitulated in a new way under scientific consciousness. But then you do the same thing towards the end, and you as the hard problem of God, and I just started. It was late. I may have had bourbon, but I just start giggling and thinking of how many like professional philosophers of science I rolled my eyes at when you talk about consciousness. They either spend all this time explaining in a way that it's not real, or they're like, because we know we have one, we got to reinvent dualism. And I'm like, come on, we can do a little better than this. And now it started making me feel the exact same way as when you read certain theologians that go like, we have a problem. Our God talk and stuff doesn't have traction with the world we live in. And now our solution is, and you just start looking at the solution like, this is the best you can come up with? Like, if you read the Bible, there's like way cooler stuff in here than you're working with. Like, why haven't we thought about this? And then you're like, but if you just like, don't just look at the results of individual science experiments, but look at the growing depth and web of relations that scientific world's giving, like, there's probably traction to be made. Or you start, why are you still only using language and symbols that are part of your tradition, and they have to be exegeted and interpreted with your conclusions in the 16th century as its final goal, when you have neighbors that live beautiful lives inspired by multiple religious traditions they never even got to hang out before, right? Like, you start having these things, and that hard God problem, anyway, you can see why I was so amused by it. I was just, you can say whatever you want about it, but I was just hoping you were as amused as yourself when you wrote it down as I was when I read it. Because
I kind of put it out there, honestly, just as a kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, and wonder, wonder if anyone will really kind of get anything out of this. But it's the same idea with consciousness, like, we're arguing over the very thing, that we have, and we don't know what it is. And we can analyze everything, going to look for that consciousness neuron, or, the God neuron or whatever. And, you just don't find it. And that's the whole thing. It's a very strange problem, and it's irresolvable, quite honestly. In the same way with God. I mean, you can't, for all the theologizing we have, I don't think we're any closer to God than, as if, people who are just living a good life or whatever. So, we have working definitions of these things, of consciousness or God. And in fact, some people say that could be the same thing. Maybe the hard problem of consciousness is the hard problem of God. So they're just one and the same problem. And it's kind of, it's kind of putting that out there. It just that is a very speculative idea, quite honestly. Just seeing if, how it might provoke or evoke ideas in other people like yourself.
Well, one of the things that, one of the reasons I like it is that the hard problem of consciousness occurs the moment you think consciousness is something you have to give an account of, right? Like, that your account of the universe has to include the fact that you're an experiencing subject. Then you're like,
Yeah.
Then but we have similar ones that show up when, like, we have our like ongoing, growing understanding of the beginning of our space-time. We literally don't have access to non-space-time unless you put the origin of our space-time in a previous space-time, but then, like, you're just...
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's the same thing. Like, you can't get rid of consciousness to really talk about, what you have an objective view of consciousness. It's not possible.
And it's similar though, right? Like, about value, like the reality of value in the universe is something that you see from the interpreting the world, where certain possibilities are privileged over others for flourishing, happens the moment there's a cell, and who knows when how you would go to evaluate it elsewhere. In some sense, I would think the fact that one side of the periodic table are really wonderfully internally consistent, and the other ones are like creatively polyamorous, and that brings together a whole complexity of relations that life emerges, like, that's cool. But, like, from the very place you start to look at life, evaluative engagement with the world exists. And just because it's in our understanding of the world observed, is it in our account of the universe? So, like, these things like origin, the origin of life, the origin of our space-time, consciousness, value, all these kinds of things sit there. And when we give either dualistic or reductive accounts, the big picture you give is no longer holds space for the very realities that are nearest to you. And I think that like the hard problem of God thing is very similar, because normally what we're debating publicly about God is so far from anything beautiful and compelling that I'm just generally uninterested. But there is something that is a feature of human existence that I think needs to be included in
Yeah.
an account of the human. Teilhard gets at. I mean, this is one of the places I really like how Ronner did it in like the transcendental existential, right? Because it doesn't require a particular thematized conclusion, but that human beings live as if addressed.
Right.
Sorry, that was a
Yeah.
ramble. When I read a book and wrote my notes about it, my interviews turn into me talking to you, telling you the things I thought of while reading it.
That's wonderful, actually. Yeah, I really like Runner as well. But, it's so interesting. I mean, you're absolutely right. We talk about these great theories and, religious beliefs and everything. But fact is, every time, like, there's nothing about us that's not a present occasion of consciousness, right? So all of life is always, in a sense, it's always beginning, always. And there's never really a past. That's the whole funny thing about it, even though we have these kind of ideas from the past. And in other words, there's something about, I think, the mind that does get stopped. I think there are circuits that kind of get like jammed, and there's actually I once had a book called The Captive Mind, how, the mind can captivate certain ideas and create neural circuits in such a way that the brain is kind of locked into them, and it's sort of hard to get out of them. I think that's what you're talking about. But the fact is, we're always present. Consciousness is always present. It's never past, in the same way that God is always present, never past. And it's always present in a way that we're oriented, it's both within us and yet it's orienting us beyond ourselves. Your idea of the supernatural is essential, or Ronner's idea, there's something about us that's here now, active, engaged, dynamically present. And yet that same presence is impelling us to go beyond, never past. And that's the funny thing. Being locked in the past is the most artificial existence possible. We're probably the only species on Earth that is governed by the past, by remembrance of the past. I mean, I can't imagine the trees outside or the flowers, or like the little earthworms going, do you remember what happened, 200 years ago? Always present. And I think that's one of the insights from science is that in quantum physics in particular, the whole notion of time is completely turned upside down. I think I'm trying to get to that idea of, with the hard problem of God, that it's not even a problem. It's really an existential reality. And it's a dynamic existential reality that's always pushing us onto, what we are becoming. So I do really agree in the Heideggerian sense, becoming, as we're constantly being thrown forward, so to speak, into something new, into future. And that's really exciting, if we could bring everything else, together with that, like then be Jesus and love and, all the good stuff we learned about.
Okay, so one other topic that's tangentially related, but we had a lot of fun talking about it in person. How does the challenge you're describing and the dynamism of the divine in our becoming, like, how does that help you frame the conversations taking place around humanity's relationship with technology and technology remaking humanity, AI, that kind of thing? Plus, Teilhard's kind of vision anticipates a kind of, a global brain connection space and such. Go wherever you want with that.
I looked at the rise of computer technology. So I would take Alan Turing as the kind of the beginner here. I'm going to take him as a starting point, insofar as we've always had machines that can calculate numbers and stuff like that. But, a machine that can think like a human. So I think that Turing test is a good starting point. And therefore, I am very, very interested in the historical contextualization of the Turing test. In other words, this came on the heels of, two, major world war, Korean War, a lot of violence, the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, the Ukrainian Holocaust. I mean, the vast destruction. And then, of course, Turing himself being gay, criminally gay, to be public about it would have been really a criminal, being charged as criminal. And therefore, I think humanity was at wit's end. I mean, we had really unraveled by mid-20th century. And, there is something deep within us that refuses existential death. We're killing one another, but we will not die as a species. And so I do think that Turing test as, first of all, an experiment. Can a machine think like a human? That was really, but my question is, where does that emerge from? Like, what compelled him? And I think Turing himself was up against a brick wall. I'm gay, I'm gonna be killed, and is this the best we can do? So there's something there that shifts. It's a mutation of consciousness, quite honestly, another mutation. And I think it sets up something. So one way I describe artificial intelligence, why has it become the number one evolver of humanity, at changing us at an exponential rate, according to Ray Kurzweil? I think technology replaced the heavens. It's a new cosmology, basically. Where, for the medieval person, they would go into the wider cosmos and look at the heavens and the stars, and there was a sense of awe and wonder and imagination. And now, since modern science named the stars, it's mapped galaxies, it can tell you the distance. Every time we measure something, we collapse the mystery out of it. And we need a place of the infinite. We need the place for the infinite, for the possibilities. So we're back to Plato's worlds, basically. We need the place of ideal forms. And I think the internet, the cyberspace, is the new place of ideal forms. It's like the collective unconscious writ large, written into the language of computer code. And it is infinite. I can go online. I can find an avatar. I can be another person. I can, go to dark webs, to my real deep, dark self and live that one out, right? Yeah, don't worry. There's really nothing there. But, anything is
Your
possible.
Pelagius fantasies.
Yeah, exactly. And that is so much more attractive than going to an institutional church, and being told by Father, what to believe, and Jesus comes to save us. And it's sort of and it's definitely more attractive than going and sitting by a tree, and hugging a tree, because we want to be ecologically sensitive. So there's something about cyberspace that has basically overtaken all our other attractions. And, as some transhumanists say, it's kind of replaced religion itself. It's like transhumanism is, in a sense, it fulfills the New Testament promises. Salvation will save ourselves. Immortality, brain downloading, cryonics, pharmaceuticals, who needs to worry about the death barrier anymore? And therefore, there is something within us that deeply longs to go beyond us, and technology saying, we're here for you, but we've created it. So there's something with us. And that's one of the reasons, I keep writing in terms of the Not Yet God. There's something with us that is unreconciled. And we are deeply, deeply searching for that reconciliation of self, like what we can become. So that kingdom of God is within you is no longer, now it's on my screen. So, the kingdom of God is on your internet, in your chat GPT-4. So, and of course, because we have developed technology in a sense without really thinking about it. So the unreflective cyber life may not be worth living, quite honestly. I think it has taken off like a supersonic jet, and it's basically a supersonic jet with no pilot. There's no one at the helm except for big business and a lot of people a small number of people making a lot of money. Chips. I mean, the chip industry has skyrocketed through the roof. Super chips, quantum computing, robotics, brain downloading, you name it, biohacking, implantable software. It's all here. We are not prepared for the world that we ourselves have said yes to. And religion is worried, like, whether or not we're really being, like, if I go back to Catholic theology, like, are we really being faithful to Thomas or not? And I'm like, seriously? Are you kidding? So, I, I can't believe it.
What's fascinating to me is any effort to understand Aquinas, you would meet a creative genius who found a compelling account of the world from Muslim scholars that he thought
Exactly.
the faith he inherited, it brought with it an encounter of the divine, but it needed to reorient the way it gives an account of everything else in light of the
Yeah.
best account of knowledge he'd ever thought through. And he does that. And then the
Yeah.
people that made him the theologian were like, well, now that we've got that done with, we don't ever have to ask these questions again. It's like the least Thomist thing to do is like
Yeah.
what Thomas refused to do was recapitulate the interpretation of Lombard's sentences he was handed.
Yeah.
And
No, like, yeah. He would have been very involved, by the way, in artificial intelligence discussion. I think he would have been very, very engaged in these sciences today. That's exactly what he did in his own time. But the fact is, we have marginalized science. If I hear this one more time, technology is just a tool that I use. No, it isn't. It's actually part of who you are now. So we have exoskeletal cells. You take a cell phone away or a computer away from your teenage person, I guarantee you they will have a complete breakdown. That we don't do well. And even if some say, oh, well, my kids don't, they don't want, but it's not even that. It's that it's the whole culture. It doesn't matter if you have a cell phone or not. It's that if you go to the grocery store, if you go to the bank, pretty soon education will be completely computerized as well. So we're just not prepared for the world that we are actually have given, our condone, has said, yes, okay, do it, please. Teilhard thought, this could really be helpful. It really could build up the body of Christ, actually. But we would need other things going on. One is to, in a sense, understand our part in theogenesis, or the, birthing of God within, kind of that not yet God. We would have to then, incorporate values of community, unity, building towards a world of love and charity. And then he would ask, is technology helping us do those things? That's our question. If not, then we shouldn't do it. Then we need to slow down and recenter, recalculate, to use the computer language or your GPS language. Our GPS is completely off, basically. So I fear, quite honestly, we're either going to have a complete makeover of our systems within, I'd say, 10 years of time with technology. Or, we're going to have some crazy person in some remote part of the world, some 16-year-old hacker, with a little computer, who's going to, create a complete global shutdown because they were able to log in and change the code. And honestly, the government has no handle on this. We have no ethics. We have no public policies that really regulate anything. It's a runaway show. So we are at the whim of Google and Microsoft and NVIDIA and everyone else. So,
well, at least Google's motto used to be "Do no evil."
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is now, but it's like,
well, they got rid of that. So
there is Google. There's Google Church. There's Google Prayers. There's I don't know if you ever came across that, but it's really. And then if you're familiar with that famous painting, forget the guy's, I forget his name, but it's Steve Jobs as the new savior, and it's the birth of the Mac, like as the new salvific
exciting
entity. Yeah. So there's a very close parallel between religion and technology, and that's not my particular view. There's a lot of scholarship there.
In a few weeks, this book comes out, Godlike, a 500-year history of artificial intelligence in myths, machines, and monsters. My friend Kester Bruin wrote it. He's part of radical theology movement, but this book this book's brilliant. And now I just want you two to hang out and talk.
That would be so interesting. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
But one of the things when I think of the invitation that's at the end of the Not Yet God, and the way technology has reformed human existence is that kind of our infatuation with technology is in part a way to mediate connections, putting actual more distance between us and different elements and parts of nature. And
Mhm.
it's part of our means of controlling our environment, the world, nature, and stuff around. And
Yeah.
when uh, to me, the way our relationship to technologies help create a world where we don't want to be called, right? Like we lose, so in a sense, we're losing the potential or possibility for belief in anything big, for like the event of calling, like the encounter of being called, of being seized, of inviting our participation in potentiality
Yeah.
requires uncontrollability, and it requires deep relational connection. And
Yeah.
the kind of modernity's way it's dialed up technology is for
Yep.
control of the self, for control of the world, for control of nature, and these kinds of things. That's how it gets that eschatological or
Yeah.
theological depth that you were raising. And so,
True.
to me, part of what will be required uh, to kind of get to a new paradigm will actually be communities that intentionally make space for the uncontrollability and a space for
Mhm.
reconnection and grounding in the web of life
Yeah.
and the world. Because those are the very things that our technologically addicted society once
Yeah.
managed out of existence.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I've been involved in this project called the Future of Human Collective Consciousness, the New Sphere project in California. And what we are learning is that, first of all, there's a place called the Global Brain Institute at the Free University in Belgium, and they've been doing a lot of work on complexity and evolution. And they are really looking at the next level of what we call noospheric life, or life on this now hyper connected level of mind. So a new type of, they say a new type of organism is emerging. So one of the things is we have to recognize with technology is it's actually moving us out of the species that we've known to grow up and love, the Homo sapiens species, and we're moving into a new type of person. Some call it the global superorganism. Gregory Stock in 1993 wrote his book on the meta man. It's a new type of person that has a different locus of identity, which some might look at the post-human as this kind of new personhood. So while, it's interesting, while you name, sort of the way technology is having in somewhat a negative effect on us, we could also look at this time in terms of, say, a time of death as we're moving towards a new resurrection. So there's a kind of a crucified nature going on with technology, sort of a death of a species. And yet we know in evolution, every death, you might say, is a new birth. Every arrival is a new departure. And so this notion of, I'm really fascinated by the notion of the meta man. Um, Teilhard spoke of the ultra human, that we're moving towards something that is planetary, a planetization. And because these ideas are still so novel to us, we have no idea what the heck, how to make sense of these things. But the key for me is that what can move technology toward a more holistic, in other words, to realize it can actually further what we are together, our systems, our communities, is religion. So, Philip Hefner was a tremendously insightful Lutheran theologian, said if we cannot imagine that religion takes shape in technology, then we have eliminated the religious depth dimension of the most significant development in human becoming. I think that is so
Mhm.
insightful. And he also says to eliminate religion from technology is to leave us fearful and vulnerable. And I think that's exactly where we are. We are fearful and vulnerable of technology, but yet we're completely enraptured by it. We're so entangled with it that to the fact that we are being changed by it. So I think, and the other thing I just wanted to point out is this really insightful paragraph from Marcia McLuhan, the media specialist, who did that really kind of awesome Playboy interview in 1960. And this is what McLuhan said. This is 1960. This is just like, I mean, the term artificial intelligence was coined in 1956. This is like so new, but he was so prophetic. He said, with computer technology, we could proceed from translating languages to bypassing them entirely in favor of an integral cosmic unconsciousness. There is the Jungian part. The computer holds out the promise of a technologically engendered state of universal understanding and unity, a state of absorption in the logos that could knit humankind into one family and create a perpetuity of collective harmony and peace. Psychic communal integration, made possible by the electronic media, could create the universality of consciousness, foreseen by Dante when he predicted that we would continue as not more than broken fragments until they were unified into an inclusive consciousness, the mystical body of Christ, which is the ultimate extension of the human. And so here, this is 1960. McLuhan actually anticipated what the computer could do for us in a way that Teilhard did in 1950. This could actually bring about the Christogenesis, the birthing of a unified body. Unified, not like we're all in this together, but the plurality brought together through a new linkage of mind and heart. That's the one thing that Teilhard said. And if technology does not deepen love, on a universal level, then not going to be helpful at all. So I actually think that can be good. It's we are out to lunch with it. Honestly, it's not even on the radar. I had one colleague say to me, "Do not talk to me about technology." Like, okay, well, we'll do that.
Well, but I mean, I think you're right? Like a part of the horizon at the end of the book is the recognition that as a species, without myths that ground us in cooperative, meaningful relations and feet that are planted in the nature that sustains us, then the horizon in front of us isn't one that bears the weight of God, like the invitation of the divine. And one of the things that's going on in our current, the way the economics of our technological advance is working is it's not grounded in its relationship with nature, both from minerals acquisition, the way it's connected to an economic system that's not addressing climate and all that kind of stuff, and the almost monopoly-like space for the major companies in technology and AI and these kinds of things are still companies whose ultimate allegiance are to their shareholders, which is the very kind of allegiance that has problematized a host of technologies in the past, right? And so to not for if religion, and we mean religion not like a religion has to figure out how to do this, but for human beings not to find again stories that put the fire of value in the equations of our living, then the animating power for our relationship to each other is mediated by technology, our non-human neighbors in nature, and our future children and ahead of us are deeply problematized. And you're not solving it by coming up with nifty ways to preserve a 14th century defense for the reality of God.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I mean, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to really figure, out what's really going on. I think what the difficulty is it's at such a speed now. It's at such a momentum that we can't even breathe, take that short breath to just reflect on what has been happening. Where are we going with this technology? How should we use it? How should we develop it? And here's where, honestly, if we do not have a theological revolution soon, it is a runaway show for technology. I do think that religions are way entirely too passive. They're too withdrawn. They're, they're doing good things, justice and social justice. And honestly, we're off. If we could understand the big picture, technology is dealing with the big picture. And if we could align ourselves, religiously with that big picture, the other problems will actually find a resolution within that bigger picture. The questions of social justice, the question of gender inclusion, the question of, whatever gender you are or whatever race you are, immigration, the wealth gap, all these things would find a new future, but we're so off, honestly, on our analysis of things. We're just devolving quickly. So we're thinning out. And people take something like the not yet God as some esoteric or novel approach to ideas. We do not do well with prophetic insights. We don't do well with, we don't do well with experimental religious insights. We're pretty sure they're off, like they're against God. And I'm like, we're going to kill ourselves this way. We have no idea. And it's very hard. How do you, it's the same thing with our politics in this country. Like, how do you get people out of that deep, deep, deep fear? And it's kind of a vicious cycle. People are deeply fearful now that the wrong decision or the wrong move is going to annihilate everything for them. And so there's no freedom to really engage new ideas on God and AI. And, and the thing is, that's the very thing we need. So we need someone to write, we need new prophets and we need new leaders, to say, it's okay. God is, in fact, God is like, go for it, please, do think new. Like, this is way too old. I'm not that old. So, I love Meister Eckhart's thing. God is the newest thing there in, the youngest thing there is. And when we're united to God, we become new again. And that's what we have to do. Technology is about, we will become new. And that's where religion has to be as well. We will become new. Here on this earth, like here on this earth, here on this planet with the 7 continents that are shifting now with global warming. And we have to wake up. Honestly, we're a species that has been so asleep and locked in. We have I don't want to use the word autism, or I don't want to offend anyone, but there's kind of a brain, there's a global brain syndrome that's sort of locked into itself. And we're not fully functioning as a global mind. That's the whole thing. And a global mind, in my view, is a global soul. I actually really like Plato's idea of the world soul. We need something to connect us together. And, when you start talking to people one-on-one, the old human thing, where a person meets another person and they start to share values and you go, wow, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And I think AI could play a vital role in that. But not if we just say, yeah, take it away. I need a new computer because, we're up to 7G. Oh, I need a chip in my brain because now everyone has a chip. Or, my kid needs to be biohacked because he won't get along with his classmates. And this things that we're constantly trying to keep up on this breathless pace of development. And it's mindless and it's aimless. And that's dangerous, quite honestly.
Yeah. Have fun, Illia.
Yeah. I did too, Jeff. I really, really appreciate your insights. You always bring such good questions, and I always talk too much.
Well, I am asking you questions about your book. See, I worry I talk too much because I'm like, everyone listening hasn't read the book, but I did, so I have things I want to talk to you about. So, but everyone should definitely check out the Not Yet God, high quality theological material, and you too might get towards the end and start giggling when it gets to the hard problem of God. And
Jeff, always good to see you.
Oh yeah.
All right. So our next rendezvous will be in Denver. Is that right, Colorado?
That's right. This October 17th to 19th. It'll be a good old time. And yeah, I mean, we're going to have some fun.
Different.
I like getting in trouble with you, Illia.
I can say likewise, actually. I enjoy our conversations and musings and, explorations into the unknown, or just maybe just mapping new territory of what can possibly be known. So, great. That's fun.
Awesome.